Welcome to this week's episode of We Got You Covered on RVN TV. I'm your host, Rob Shestack, and we come to you each week and talk about various things in insurance and employee benefits related material. This week we have with us Kyle Gallagher, and a little bit of background on Kyle. He has his business administration degree from University of Miami. Go Hurricanes, right?
Go Canes.
Go Canes. He's worked with over 4,000 borrowers in the student loan repayment program, frequent speaker for students for dental schools and hospitals, 18 years of experience in institutional finance, right? Yep. And then you are the Senior Vice President of Business Development for GradFin.
Yes.
So today's episode, we're going to talk about the student loan epidemic that we have in this country. And Kyle is one of the foremost experts dealing and helping with employees and students with their debt. Before we begin, I always like to share with the viewers some statistics. A Glassdoor survey, which we talked about a few weeks ago, 79% of employees would prefer to have new or additional benefits than have a pay increase. And what's interesting is when they talked about the top 10 employee benefits that employees would like to see, number 7 was tuition reimbursement, and number 8 was financial assistance for student loans. And today we're going to talk about student loans. So Kyle, there is a real serious problem that people are dealing with student loan repayment, whether they can't afford to pay it, or the interest rates are high, or the terms are not good, or they just don't know how to navigate through the system in and of itself, because it could be confusing. So how big of a problem is the student loan programs today and the debt?
Sure. So the estimate is about $1.5 to $1.6 trillion of student loans that are outstanding today. It's surpassed credit cards as in terms of household debt, and the only household debt that's ahead of, or that there's more of, is mortgages. So I mean, it's an amazing amount of student debt that's out there. You think about the loans that are outstanding and the interest rates that people are kind of fighting through, and the average rate's about 7%. But the biggest drawback, the biggest problem that we see at GradFin, and really the focus of our company, and especially on the corporate side, is education. So we estimate that 90% of the borrowers that come in that we end up talking to don't even know their interest rates when the conversation starts. And our conversation is really their first look at what their student loans look like. There's a lot of solutions out there that are technologically, or that are all tech savvy and really focused on click here, read this paragraph, click over here, and figure it out yourself. The whole repayment system, especially when you get into the federal repayment programs and what's available, it's immensely complex. And to put the burden of understanding on an individual is unfair in my mind, to say the least. Then even navigating the repayment tools like a refinance. I use the example all the time. When I was 24, I think I bought my first home, and I think it was $125,000. And there were 5 people involved in that transaction. 5 professionals who are guiding me through, whether it be the mortgage side or navigating the property and the inspection. And meanwhile, you've got doctors who are finishing their degree with $500,000 of student debt, and here they're supposed to just navigate that repayment on their own. And so that's why GradFin exists, is we're a tool to, number one, educate people on how their loans are working today. But then we want to dive into all the different repayment options, because it can be unique for each individual depending on their goals, depending on where they're going to work. And our education provides them just a full understanding of those options so they can make the best decision for themselves.
So you said the average interest rate was 7%. What's the average debt?
So it's tough to say, because average debt for an undergrad, they estimate about $35,000. But once you get into graduate school, it's different for each major depending on what you're doing. And then from my experience and from what we work with to what I see as the national averages for a lot of these debts, these averages were all created years ago. because what I see in the real world is probably 40 to 50% higher than what is reported as the average. And that could be skewed because we're talking to the borrowers, but I don't think so.
Has student debt ever led to bankruptcy?
Yes, yeah, and it's very frustrating because student debt can drive you into bankruptcy, but student debt can't be included in a bankruptcy. So it's not dischargeable. Student debt is very tough to discharge. You can discharge it in the event of death. They say in disability, but I've seen it's got to be a very severe disability. I've seen brain injured people who can't hold the job they used to hold, and now they're in a job that's not that high paying, and that's not going to get discharged.
Wow, that's some fascinating information. Who is really impacted with this? It's maybe not necessarily the student, but who else can be impacted by this?
Yeah, it's pretty sad, and you see the media a lot of times, and all they focus on are the millennial generation or the younger generation, and yeah, that's a huge burden for that crew. I'd say anybody really 45 and under can be suffering from some pretty, just on statistics, but can be suffering from a pretty high debt burden, but. It's not just the millennials. So with undergraduate school, if you're a parent, you've got 3 kids in some of these Northeast schools that are costing $50,000, $60,000 a year, guess what? Even if you're making $500,000 a year, you've got to borrow to fund that a lot of times, and especially if you didn't properly save, or not even properly save, but if you weren't able to save. And so what these parents end up doing is layering on Parent Plus loans. And Parent Plus loans are an amazing tool. They're great. They're great access to capital, and they're very quick and convenient because it's through the school, through the financial aid system. But people don't understand, number one, there's a 4.6% origination fee on the Parent Plus loans. So as that loan accrues, the interest rate's only 7% this year, 7.06% this year. But when you factor in that accrual on the origination fee, it's a much bigger cost of attaining that debt. But anyway, these Parent Plus loans, I see parents who are loading themselves up with 2, 3, I think 350 is the highest, $350,000 of Parent Plus loans that I've seen a parent with. And here, they're 65. They're supposed to be a couple of years, if not retired. Guess what? They're working into their 70s to pay that down if they get there.
So you were saying, doctors' loans, and listen, we want doctors. They save lives, right, and they help us with new medical technologies and so forth. $400,000 or $500,000 of student loans, then they're probably going to buy a house.
Right.
And now they're 30-something years old and they're in debt $1 million. How do they get out of that?
One key thing with doctors is they do have the ability to do public service loan forgiveness should they stay in a teaching hospital, a nonprofit hospital, or a VA, for example. So they do have an avenue out that is efficient. But you're right. There's a vast majority of the doctors that are going into private practice, and number one, it's a huge inhibitor for private practice. And not just doctors, but dentists. So dentists have a huge problem because they don't have that access to the nonprofit world. They don't have the access to the nonprofit sector. And so for a dentist to come out, they'll, if they go to a school in southwestern PA, they're coming out with $400,000 or $500,000 of student debt. And they all want to go out, buy their practice, get set, start their families. They've been in school for till they're 30. It's time to get ready, right? And they all want to jump right into it. Well, they've got to solve this student loan problem before they can do it, so it delays everything. So you can think of those examples, but so what you're seeing is student loans are delaying the purchase of that first home, and not just for doctors. You're seeing it, the entire younger generation is really inhibited from buying that home and saving for retirement. So it's delaying that, and that's causing huge impacts, not just in the individual, but if you implicate that or extrapolate it over all of America, it's got economic impacts. There's 44 million Americans, is the last estimate I saw, that have student loans. This problem is enormous.
Talk about that public loan repayment.
Sure.
I'm not quite sure what that is.
So public service loan forgiveness, and it's a law. It was signed into law in 2007. In that program, if you are working for a nonprofit, and nonprofit being a 501c3, not all nonprofits are 501c3. So if you're working for a 501c3 or you're working for a federal state entity, then you can qualify for public service loan forgiveness for certain types of your federal loans. This program is fantastic if you can execute it properly. The problem is it was signed into law, and there was a lot of opaqueness around the proper compliance, how to properly participate, how to get what's called, it's all focused and centered around qualified payments, and navigating to actually accruing qualified payments or being awarded qualified payments. That's a lot of paperwork and a lot of process just in itself. But then figuring out what loans are or are not qualified and how do you set yourself up. Then you have to be on an income-driven repayment program. And there's 5 different income-driven repayment programs. So they all have individual rules, like depending on if you're married, they might calculate the payment for you based off of the combined household income. But if you file your taxes separately, depending on the program you're on, then they're only going to look at one individual's income. And so basically you're working for the qualified entity, and now you're on a qualified repayment program. Then you can start earning these numbers. But anyway, the stats are the programs that, so it started in 2007, so you've had 2017, 18, and then now. And the applicants who have thought they made it 120 payments and have applied for forgiveness, and over 98% of them have been turned down.
You know what, Kyle, let's stop right there.
Sure.
This is great information. It's that time of the show where we have to recognize our sponsors, and then we'll pick up on the public
service loan forgiveness.
Public service loan forgiveness. We'll be right back in a few minutes on We Got You Covered, RBN TV, and we're here with Kyle Gallagher.
Hey,
see you in a few.
Shelter dogs aren't broken. They've simply experienced more life. If they were human, we would call them wise. They would be the ones with tales to tell and stories to write. The ones dealt a bad hand who responded with courage. Do not pity a shelter dog. Adopt one.
Say we've got grit, and we'll take it as a compliment. Because it's our uncommon drive, our spark within, that brings us together and sets us apart. We are temple made. And when others take shortcuts, when others take breaks, when others take the easy way, we take charge.
Add us on social media to watch bloopers, behind-the-scenes footage, previews, and more.
I work 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. So when I'm off the clock, I gotta get stuff done. So when I need a snack, I need something healthy, tasty, and easy to eat. Like wonderful pistachios without the shells. They're protein-powered, delicious, and great on the go. And that's perfect for me. Thanks, Liz. A woman without a lot of time.
Whether you're a gourmet cook or just want to eat like one, visit Rostelli Market Fresh, your home for the freshest, locally sourced ingredients to please everyone who loves great food. Our organic meats, quality seafood, and free-range poultry are cut fresh to order. Chefs create culinary-inspired prep foods made fresh every day, which pair nicely with our vast selection of fine wines and spirits. Choose from handmade pastas, artisan cheeses, organic produce, and grocery items, all from the finest purveyors. Rostelli Market Fresh, from our family to yours.
That you covered on RVN TV. We're here with Kyle Gallagher from GradFin, and we've been talking about the student debt program. And Kyle was throwing out some statistics. $1.6 trillion of student debt is out there, and it's the second most next to mortgages.
Yes.
Right? And we were talking about the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and a lot of people probably don't know what that is, but being in this area that we are geographically, there's a lot of universities in the city, colleges, 501c3 nonprofits, and so forth. And we were talking a little bit about how it works, and there can be some forgiveness. When we were talking before the show, you were talking about the paperwork.
Correct.
And if you 5 pages, if you check the wrong box, put the staple in the wrong area, and you gave that example, you could get rejected for that program. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So there's two and a half years of data. It's improving slightly, but last published data was 98.5% of the people who were applying for public service loan forgiveness have not received their forgiveness. And the reason being is non-compliance, the vast majority of them, over 99%. The reason being for being turned down is they were non-compliant with the rules of the program. And it's everything from checking the wrong box on a verification of employment, which your employer has to do, to, I've seen missed paperwork or missing paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of background that has to go in to maintaining your compliance in that program. We actually, GradFin, started a program where for $199 a year, we work with the borrowers. We're an available resource. We help them navigate which repayment program to go on. But most of all, we really focus on the compliance of that program, and we guide people through to the proper compliance in public service loan forgiveness so that we can maximize the odds that they're going to get forgiven at the end. And we started this program in April. I think we just surpassed 200 members who are participating in that. We also have the luxury of our CEO being very heavily involved in the in federal politics. And a few weeks ago, we love to keep our members or the people who are participating in that abreast of any conversation that goes on the floor on the Capitol. And so a few weeks ago, he went down, he live streamed some conversations that were going on. So that went out to all of our public service loan forgiveness members so they can be on top of and know where that program sits.
In a few minutes, we're going to talk about tuition reimbursement and some other federal laws that you were working on, that you were filling me in. But we were also talking about, you gave the example of me having to do my own tax returns if there were no accountants left. Can you give that example to the audience? That was a really good one. Yeah,
so with that huge rejection rate in public service loan forgiveness, everybody is always pretty aghast at that number. And so I bring up, I say, all right, well, imagine if the federal government just disallowed for, TurboTax or H&R Block, and there was no more assistance, and everybody had to go out to the post office and pick up their own tax forms and fill them out independently on their own, and then submit their own personal taxes. What percentage of the American population would be able to complete that without error? What percentage would have that not rejected? And I think that can give you a little bit more understanding of that initial 98.5%.
That's just astonishing, that number. It is. Now, if they would have filled out the paperwork correctly, probably a higher probability of them being accepted into the forgiveness program?
No question. It's a written law. And so if you execute that law properly as a citizen and you're compliant with all of your payments, it's granted. The Congressional Budget Office already has the money allocated for everybody who's properly participating in that program. They just have to execute properly to get there.
So let's talk a little bit about, a lot of employers focus on wellness. You have physical wellness, stop smoking programs, weight loss programs. You have mental wellness, and then you have this financial wellness, which is a really hot topic for employers today. How does your program help? Does it help with absenteeism or reducing absenteeism and helping presenteeism? And you know, it's the second most debt that employees incur other than mortgages. And it's got to weigh heavily on an employee when they go into work. Maybe they're not as productive as they should be. So how does your program help with those types of issues that employers face?
Sure. I mean, the student loans for most employees are this enormous burden that they hide from most of the time. And, you know, they try not to even, they pretend it's not there. And they're not sleeping at night. I mean, we've seen people with really, really high, I guess, mental stress levels.
Yeah.
You know, you don't always have a solution that's going to help that person that day, but if you can create a plan for them and they give them an understanding of what they're doing and an understanding of knowing that they're moving forward, it's a huge alleviation of that stress.
And you were saying that some employers were actually paying the $199 fee on behalf of the employee.
Yes, yeah, we have some nonprofits that are helping their employees participate in that by either paying for or subsidizing that fee. There's also a benefit to them where a verification of employment's an annual paperwork that has to be done in order to properly stay compliant, and if it's all coming from a centralized location, and there's some efficiencies that we've built into that process. So it alleviates a lot of the pain for the HR and actually the employer.
The one thing that I struggle with is I know there's a federal law that allows employers to pay $5,250 a year towards tuition reimbursement. So
Right.
if the employer wants to adopt the program, just like they would a retirement plan and so forth, they could say, hey, we'll reimburse you up to $5,250 a year. You go to school. It's a great program, but there's even some issues with that as well because of the borrowing aspect.
Sure. Yeah. So even that program, it's actually everyone that I've seen is paid post the completion of the schooling. So some employers will put on academic restrictions or hurdles that people have to meet in order to get that. So you've got to see the performance of the person. So the employee has to pay for that semester. And guess what? The school wants their money up front. So you end up having to borrow for that semester, and then you finish the semester, and then you get reimbursed, and you can then pay back that loan. So that they are actually paying back the loans. So it is very similar. I mentioned our CEO, Chris Walters, is very involved in the federal politics, and we were doing a lot of lobbying to try to get that in motion, that exact thing where an employer wouldn't just be eligible to contribute tax-free to the employee's tuition, but they could also contribute tax-free to that employee's student loan balance. We've seen we had some bipartisan agreement that this is a good idea. We had some momentum there a few years ago, but government's been in stalemate. And in my opinion, I just think both parties don't want to let the other one bring it forward.
So, we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but real quick. So I can go to school, incur $5,250 of debt, let's say, go to work for an employer, and that debt's on me. Yet somebody else working for that employer then wants to go to school and incur $5,250 and finish up their schooling. That can be reimbursed by the employer tax-free, but mine can't.
Exactly.
So there's something wrong there.
Yeah.
And we do appreciate you working with our federal legislators to get that changed. I know you've been doing it for a lot of years, so if you're watching the show, please reach out to your congressman and senator and ask them to help support this, considering it's the second most debt, $1.7 trillion of debt that's facing people in our economy today.
Yeah.
So Kyle, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we have to go, but I'd like for you to tell the audience how they can contact and reach out to you if they have any questions about GradFin and your services.
Sure. Well, Rob, thank you very much for the time, but if you'd like to connect with GradFin, we have an 800 number, 844-GradFin, 844-GRADFIN, or you can look us up on the web, www.gradfin.com.
Well, Kyle, thanks for coming out to our show today. We really appreciate your insight. And thank you for allowing me into your homes and businesses every week when we got you covered. And just remember, when you have the opportunity, please pay it forward. We'll see you next week, and have a great weekend.